Hello everyone. Okay, I hope we're all well and happy. This video is going to be on elections to Congress, congressional elections. Now, technically in the exam specification, this is in the Congress section, not in the election section. I just thought with the elections taking place in November, it just kind of makes sense to do it at the same time as presidential elections, as it's all taking place in a couple of weeks anyway. So, what we need to know for congressional elections is basically like the presidential election, I suppose. You need to know what are the constitutional requirements of congressional elections, what are the reasons why some candidates win and some candidates lose. That is essentially the main point to it. You'll be very pleased to know that there's no electoral college involved in congressional elections, so that's one problem out of the way. But there are certain trends and certain kind of constitutional requirements. So the first thing I'd like you to do in your work booklet, there's a page on it says what are the constitutional requirements of congressional elections. And so using the Bennett book, which does quite a good job of this, it is on page something. Where is it? Here it is, page 279. Okay. It's got times of congressional elections and constitutional requirements. If you can get that bit done, that would be great. Press pause and then press play when you've done it. Okay then, so you've probably seen those constitutional requirements. Now, the key things about elections to Congress is that the House of Representatives, the lower house of Congress, is elected every 2 years, and the upper chamber of Congress, the Senate, they're elected for 6-year terms. But every 2 years, a third of them get re-elected or are up for election. So what happens is that every 2 years these elections coincide, or every 4 years, sorry, these elections coincide with a presidential election year. So for example, this year, 2020, is the election for the president. On the same day, every member of the House of Representatives, all 435 of them, are up for election, plus a third of the senators. Those who were elected 6 years ago, that third are up for election this year. 2 years ago, there was elections for the House of Representatives and a third of senators, the third that were elected 6 years before that date, but there was no presidential election because it was halfway through, i.e. midway through, the president's term of office. In 2016, 4 years ago, there's a presidential election, all members of the House of Representatives, and a different third of the US Senate. Now, those elections which fall in the middle of a presidential term, okay, midway through, are known as the midterm elections. And just be aware, if the question asks you about midterm elections, although some of the congressional trends are the same or very similar, there are one or two that are slightly different. Which we'll come to. So every 2 years the whole House is up for election and a third of the Senate, and then obviously every 4 years that coincides with the presidential election, and obviously in between times it doesn't do. Now, one thing to get about elections to Congress is, remember how the presidential elections have all those primaries and caucuses, which you all love so much? Well, you'd be pleased to know that they have the same for congressional elections as well, and Senate elections. They tend to just have primaries, but again, what will happen is like several months before the election in November, there will be primaries take place in congressional districts and in Senate states as well for people to select those candidates. And so all those who are on the ballot paper this November have already won a primary, possibly 2 or 3 months, or even longer actually, before the election. Some of them are pretty close, like September and stuff, before the election in November. So again, this does allow, if a senator or a House member is, a bit more conservative than their district is, there's been some new changes in their district perhaps, or, their Senate, the state they're in has changed slightly to become a little bit more liberal, then actually it might allow that party to perhaps remove the senator in the primaries with a more liberal person, or the House member with a more liberal person, or it can go the other way around as well. And what you've often been seeing in recent times, when we do the parties, we'll do about this in more detail, but like the Tea Party movement, those kind of kind of libertarian. They're a bit of an odd mix, the Tea Party, but the Tea Party group of Republicans, they try to take out Republicans in the primaries before the elections in November. And there's been some trend in the Democrats as well, where some of the more, perhaps slightly more conservative Democrats have been replaced by more liberal members in various primaries and caucuses. You don't need to know huge amounts about the primaries and caucuses or primaries for congressional elections, but it's worth knowing about it. And again, page 279 of the Bennett textbook does talk about this. So again, be aware of it. If you do get an essay about, the process of electing congressmen and presidents is not fit for purpose or something, you might want to get something about primaries for congressional people as well. If it's about, just be careful, it's about nominations and stuff. Okay, so one thing we do need to know about are the various trends. Now, in your booklet, you've got a table that says trends of congressional elections. You'll find the headings match up beautifully to the Bennett book because it kind of explains each one. So the first one is going to hit the power of incumbency. This means that sitting senators and sitting House members, usually, if they win their primary, they usually in November win re-election. And there's a really high kind of incumbency rate where incumbents often win. And again, there's a nice graph on page 281 of the Bennett textbook, and it has like the percentages of House and Senate people being re-elected. I've also got a little figure here to show you about the elections in 2018 and what those figures were, just to slightly update our friend Mr. Bennett. Okay, so just to update Mr. Bennett, this is some figures from the midterms, or the elections, in 2016. There's a few more little details on, I suppose, what's in the textbook. So again, a bit like on the textbook, on this bottom left-hand side, this table, it shows you how many House and Senate members sought re-election, how many lost in the primaries, okay, how many actually lost in the general election, and then what the percentages were and stuff on there. And you can see for the Senate, for example, not one of them lost the primary, but then 2 lost in the general election. For the House, 5 lost the primary and then 8 lost in the general election. In some ways, you could, there's some arguments say that a lot of senators and House members are perhaps a little bit more scared of primaries than they are of the actual election itself. It's also mentioned in the Bennett book about one reason for this is money. Okay, because obviously if you're an incumbent, then you usually have been in office for 2 years or 6 years, depending if you're a House or a Senator. You usually got yourself really well known. You may have spent a lot of that time, travelling around your district or state, opening schools, kissing babies, doing all that kind of stuff. And then crucially for American politics, raising money. If you've only just won your election 2 years earlier or 6 years earlier, you'll have a big effort in raising money. And you can see here on the right hand side, this is for Montana in 2018 and the money that was raised by the various candidates. So the sitting senator for Montana, John Tester, Montana's quite a Republican state, but they have a Democrat senator. Obviously he felt he was kind of endangered, so to speak. So you can see on the left hand side of this table, on the right hand side of the page, how much he raised. Okay, as the incumbent, he raised $18.2 million for the election. His opponent, this Matt Rossendale, in contrast, was only able to manage to raise $4.1 million. Obviously, that's because he's less well known and all these other things. And so you can see, in terms of advertising, all those TV adverts and stuff, how John Tester is going to completely swamp the election with adverts saying how wonderful he is and how horrible Matt is in this election. On this same graph, it has also the House, because Montana's only got 3 electoral college votes, therefore it's got 1 House member. They call it at large when it's just 1 House member. And again, you can see here how the incumbent on Greg Gianforte, a Republican, 8.2 million. His opponent, Kathleen Williams, 2.9 million. So incumbency is really important. The Coattails effect as well. Now this is becoming less important. What this is, it doesn't affect midterm elections. It only affects elections which take place in the same year as a presidential election. And what that means is that someone goes to the polling station, they vote for the Democrat to be president, and at the same time, they also vote for, the other Democrats on the ticket, lower down the ticket for that House members and senators. They kind of given a boost, if you like, to the people lower down. So if a candidate for the presidency is really, really popular, that might drive up the Democrat vote in a certain state, and whilst at the polling station, they might as well also vote for other candidates for the same party. Now, there has been a decline of this. So this graph shows the coattail effects in presidential election years from 1932 to 2016. And you can see in the 1930s, really up until the mid-80s, there was, not always, like JFK didn't really have this, but there's pretty much a coattails effect taking place whereby a popular president also won lots of congressional seats as well. The darker colour, by the way, is senators that won, and lighter is the House members. In more recent times, you can see under Bill Clinton 92, 96, George Bush in 2000, actually people voted for Bill Clinton, but they didn't correspondingly vote for House and Congressional members of his party. Obama had a bit of an upswing of coattails in 2008 and again in 2012, but Donald Trump didn't. So it must have been a number of Republicans who voted for Trump but then decided not to vote for the Republicans in that election for Congress. So the coattails effect, it had a bit of a decline, and there was a little bit of an up, I suppose, under Obama. And then finally, we got this one about split ticket voting. This is where people, they might say, right, I love Donald Trump, I'm going to vote Republican, but actually I really like my Democrat House member, therefore I'm going to vote Democrat for the House, or vice versa. So they're splitting their vote. They're voting for some positions which are Democrats, some positions which are Republican on the same day. And again, as the graph in the Bennett book shows, you can see this has really declined. If you look on figure 6.8 and 283, you see then, if you look back in 1984, 88, there were over 100 districts, House districts, which voted differently to how they voted in the presidency. But in 2016 and 2012, that's really quite a low number. In other words, in 2016, there's only 35 districts which may have voted Hillary Clinton for president, but voted Republican for the House, or vice versa. So split ticket voting is in decline in the USA. And you've also got this issue as well about fewer competitive districts. So there's fewer districts which are actually having less than 10 points between them. And one reason for that, very quickly, is something called gerrymandering. This is where the political parties who run the states decide to draw congressional boundaries around where their strongest supports are. So this, for example, is Maryland District 3, which, as you can see, it's in this dark green colour, is all over the place. It barely, there's like a little motorway thing linking them together, linking up all the voters for one party, and this is a congressional district. And I think it might be a Democrat one. Just double check that because I can't quite remember. This is Louisiana's second district as well, which spreads all the way from the outskirts of New Orleans over here on the right-hand side, all the way kind of snakes round the top end of Baton Rouge at the top of the other end here. So again, it's snaking round where there's a certain class of voters trying to make a safe district. So there are fewer congressional districts, partly due to gerrymandering. So read all the stuff on this, please, and then fill in the table, and that would be great.